It was once said to me by someone that I apparently came off as the kind of guy in Japan who bought into their own hype. In other words, I was one of those guys who came to Japan thinking that because I was a white guy, I thought I was going to be a magnet for Japanese girls. Now, anyone who knows how I am in real life would know that that couldn't be even further from the truth. No hate, I'm just so into work and hobbies like this channel that after all that is said and done, there's really no space for anything else. But hey, I'm a half glass full kind of guy, and even though an assumption that I'm some sort of passport bro would be insulting if it weren't so funny, at least I know where I definitely can buy into my own hype. In the world of match 3 puzzles, somehow equaling dating skill. In the world of Huniepop.
Come on, I know you can do better than that.
It's too late in the game for you to be pulling the shit, bro.
Oh.
It's hard to believe that Huniepop is over 10 years old now. I would say that it was one of those games that became popular during that time frame where it would be both Let's Player bait and streamer bait. I personally remember becoming aware of Huniepop myself very late in 2016, around the same time I got my then new gaming laptop, the aforementioned Lenovo IdeaPad with the Core i5-7200U and GeForce 940MX GPU. I really think I underestimated the capabilities of that laptop's GPU looking back. If I knew more about PC gaming back then, I probably would have treated it a little bit better, but c'est la vie. Glass half full thinking here. At least that underestimation of its performance capabilities led me down the rabbit hole of indie games that I actually ended up discovering and really enjoying. Some of those games ended up being some of my all-time favorites. Circling back to Huniepop, yeah, I'll admit it. Huniepop is one of my favorite games of all time. I have a lot of all-time favorite games, but I've spent so much time playing Huniepop even after the story was finished just because it was that good. Of course, my Steam stats won't reflect that since I sailed the high seas for my initial copy way back in the day. It's mostly a symptom of ignorance to digital distribution on platforms like Steam more than not wanting to support the developer. But after that initial experience, I went on to buy not just Huniepop, but the other games in the series as well. That includes Huniepop 2 Double Date, the day of its release, pre-patch. If you know what that means and you were there too, I salute you. Anyway, now that the series has basically turned 10 years old, I thought it would be neat to go back and explore the games in it in one big series retrospective. In this, I plan to follow the progress of the games and see how each game in the series manages to differentiate itself from the rest. I want to talk about not only the gameplay but also the cast of characters, as well as which varies across all 3 games. My rule for myself is simple. Finish the storyline in each game. If there is a good or perfect ending, earn that, and on the default difficulty, if there is a difficulty selection. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive back into the world of fairies, aliens, goddesses, cat girls, and who the heck knows what else. It's time for Huniepop. I really like match 3 puzzle games, be it games like Snood, Bejeweled, Peggle, or Candy Crush, for some inexplicable reason, there is something about them that I really like. Maybe it's nostalgic for me since I remember PopCap games and I was a really big Flash gamer back in the day as well. So when I saw Huniepop's whole dating mechanic was centered around Match 3 puzzle game mechanics, I knew I had to give it a try at least. But if you're going into Huniepop thinking you're going to easily conquer it with your Match 3 skills attained in Bejeweled, you'll be sorely mistaken. I was kind of taken aback by how deceptively different Huniepop turned out to be from its Match 3 contemporaries. Most Match 3 games present you with a grid or board of some kind, and it's up to you to earn points by getting as many matches as possible before either running out of moves in a numerical sense or in a no more possible matches sense. Usually there is some kind of point threshold, and typically the way these games differentiate themselves is by giving the player power-ups through perks or enhancements to current tokens on the board, which give them special abilities. While these do owe a lot to give different games within the same genre a lot of variety between games, the way you interact with them is still similar enough to where learning the ropes of one to another doesn't necessarily mean overcoming a steep initial learning curve. Huniepop, however, is different. Huniepop's core gameplay loop is centered around Match 3 game mechanics. That much is true, but there is a greater amount of depth to it that really helps to set it apart from other similar games, especially the ones which center around the free-to-play model. Huniepop does everything it can to make its style of gameplay feel as much like a substantial, real game as possible, and it does so in some really clever ways thanks to its dating sim theme. Because you're trying to successfully date all 12 girls in the game, it obviously takes more than simply matching tokens to do so. I'll talk about the puzzle mechanics later, but first I want to lay out the basics of what helps make the puzzle gameplay feel so substantial once you finally get into it. Huniepop's systems complement each other almost as though it was designed to be one of those kinds of engine builder games. Think card games like Wingspan, where certain perks and effects activated can feed another system, which feeds into another, which feeds into another, which leads to a success state, which in turn feeds the initial system, not only perpetuating the whole system, but giving it the feel of an exponential feedback loop. There are two different currencies in Huniepop: money and honey. Money is the currency used to purchase gifts and can be earned through dates. You can always earn money from dates, whether you succeed or fail, and the amount of money you earn is dependent on how many points you score and how many moves you finish with at the end of the date, if you have any left at all. In Huniepop, there are two different types of gifts. There are general gifts and character-specific gifts. The general gifts are more numerous and generally, though not always, cheaper than the specialized gifts. You can only give girls gifts that they will be interested in, and those gifts are indicated either by a star or heart icon next to the gift. There is crossover and interest between the gifts from girl to girl, so if you're going for 100% completion, it becomes important to pay attention to who has already received what gifts so you can manage them accordingly. How you track that, I will again discuss later. General gifts with the star icon next to them earn you honey, but the gifts with the heart icon next to them will also net you a gift for yourself. Again, more on that later when we talk about the puzzle gameplay. Giving the girls any kind of these general gifts is one of the ways you can earn honey. The character-specific gifts, again, are generally more expensive and can be given to its corresponding girl. These are usually based on each individual girl's specific interests or character, so there is zero crossover between these gifts. And once they are given, they do not regenerate like the general gifts do at the end of every day. Upon receiving one of these characters' specific gifts, the base amount of honey earned from talking with them increases permanently. Money can also be used to buy food and alcohol, but I'll discuss that later. You might assume that because there are two currencies in the game that honey might be the premium currency a la free-to-play mobile games. But really, you can't get honey in substantial amounts without earning money. Honey is used to purchase upgrades to your traits. Don't worry, I'll talk about those later, but suffice it to say for now that traits are essential for success in dates. I think you can kind of begin to see how this engine system builds on itself. Do well in dates, earn money, spend money to earn honey, spend honey to improve your traits, which can increase your chances of success on dates, which then earns you more money, and so on and so forth. But maybe you are a honey fiend. Huniepop's got you covered. Food and alcohol are other means to potentially drastically increase the amount of honey you can earn, especially when used together. When interacting with a girl, there are two gauges at the bottom left of your HUD. One meter starts half full and is orange. The other starts empty and is blue. These are your food and alcohol gauges respectively. Every interaction with a girl decreases the food gauge by 2 bars. Once it's empty, she won't want to do anything else until she has food, including dates. The more she is fed, the more honey you can earn via talking to her. Alcohol has a couple of effects. While interacting with her, the more alcohol you give her, the amount of honey you earn from interacting with her multiplies. The drunker she gets, the higher the multiplier. If the gauge is maxed out, you can earn insane amounts of honey just by talking to her, and if you keep her fed, you can really reap the benefits of this effect. Alcohol will also have effects that carry into the puzzle gameplay or while on dates. The drunker she is when starting the date, the more sentiment you start the date with. More on that soon. But it isn't entirely so simple. Every girl has her own tolerance to alcohol. The higher their tolerance, the more alcohol you will need to give her, which means the more money you'll have to spend. Every alcoholic beverage has its own potency value, and while that value does give a good idea of how strong each drink is, it's only a suggestion, since the number can increase or decrease depending, once again, on each girl's individual alcohol tolerance. Interacting with the girls is essential for 100% completion, even more so than earning honey, considering there is an achievement called Buying Love, which is kind of funny, I have to admit. And when I say 100% completion, I don't mean 100% achievements, but rather the achievement for 100% completion, which entails learning everything about every girl, giving them at least one of all their preferred presents on top of finishing the main game. To unlock 100% achievements requires multiple save files, or if you can do it all in a single save, it is very, very difficult. Anyway, interacting with girls is essential for learning their essential information. I won't list them all, but the information can be checked in the Honeybee. Essentially, I say that a lot. You talk to them and ask them questions or answer theirs. Once you ask them a question, the Honeybee will record their answer for future reference. You cannot ask them the same question twice, and if you do, they will scold you and you will earn no honey. Talking with them will earn you honey, and answering their questions correctly will earn you even more honey. They will typically ask you 2 different kinds of questions. All of them will test you on how well you remember the answers to questions they already answered by you. The main cast of girls, those being all of them other than Q, Venus, Momo, and Celeste, will ask you certain questions which you have to answer correctly based on how well you understand their personalities. The other girls, Q, Venus, Momo, and Celeste, will ask you different questions. Momo and Celeste about facts about cats and space, respectively, and Q and Venus will quiz you about different aspects of the other girls you've met. These conversations yield you honey, and character-specific gifts will permanently increase your base amount of honey earned from interacting with them, while their intoxication level from alcohol can significantly increase your honey yield from conversations, though it is temporary and wears off after you finish with them for the day. The Honeybee is your information hub. This is basically a mobile device modeled after an iPhone, which holds all the information you could ever need for the game. It tracks the girls so you know where all of them will be at every time of the day. It records their important information, and it tracks which gifts you've given them and which ones you have left to give them. It is also what you can use to buy gifts, as well as where you can spend your honey at improving your traits, which is pretty important for your success during dates. Traits are basically this game's RPG-style function. It is a leveling system. Essentially, you have a number of traits assigned to the different tokens that can be matched during dates, as well as other intangible traits that can also help you immensely. Huniepop consists of 8 different tokens indicated by different colors: green, blue, orange, red, pink, teal, and yellow. Flirtation, talent, romance, sexuality, passion, sentiment, and joy, respectively. Not all of these have corresponding traits, however. Flirtation, talent, romance, and sexuality all have corresponding traits, which, when upgraded, can increase the point yields from matches made with those tokens. Passion has its own trait, which can be upgraded, but passion tokens do not award you points. Rather, they increase your passion percentage, which helps to boost the minimum number of points gained by the other tokens. Upgrading the passion trait will increase the maximum percentage the passion gauge can be increased to, with 200% being max. There are also broken heart tokens, and matching these will have catastrophic consequences. They will subtract a certain percentage of your overall earned points or affection you've earned, and in some cases, a single match of these tokens without any upgrades can mean certain failure. One way to rectify the issue of broken heart tokens is to upgrade your sensitivity trait. Upgrading sensitivity will decrease the percentage of affection lost from a broken heart token match. Huniepop also has powered up tokens that will occasionally be created from making matches. These tokens basically multiply the base number of points earned from a match with the same tokens. Upgrading this trait, called Charisma, will increase the multiplier for the points earned when matching with a powered-up token. The last of these traits is Luck. Luck increases the rate you receive chances to make matches of 3 and 4 in a row. It goes without saying that the more 4 and 5 in a row matches you make, the higher your point yields will be with those matches. Suffice it to say, as the game increases in difficulty, upgrading these traits becomes increasingly necessary. But because upgrading traits costs honey, your resources are finite, and so you will have to think strategically about how to spend them in the best way possible. Going into the core Match 3 puzzle gameplay itself, you'll find out relatively quickly that indiscriminately matching tokens like you might in some other games of this style won't really work. Maybe at first it will, but that'll wear off very quickly. At first, it might seem that the puzzle gameplay is simplified from the typical Match 3 games. You can move any token the full vertical or horizontal range as you like, rather than more conventional games which let you move them only one space vertically or horizontally. This might seem like it makes the game easier, but it's a bit deceptive. What really helps set Huniepop apart from other games in the Match 3 genre of puzzle games is that the puzzle mechanics are shaped by the dating simulation framing of the game. Because of this, you are required to change what you might be used to when it comes to your strategy for approaching dates, depending on which character you decide to go out with. Each girl has a preferred trait and a least preferred trait. The tokens will earn you points, but depending on which traits each girl prefers, some token matches will earn a lot more than others. A match of tokens representing a girl's preferred trait will earn you a lot more points than they normally will, and a match of tokens representing a girl's least preferred trait will earn significantly fewer points than normal. Even if you have your traits leveled up to their maximum, the preferred and least preferred multiplier will still heavily affect the affection you receive from matches. It's still a good idea to match to earn affection, of course, but matching indiscriminately isn't necessarily a great idea. If you're faced with a choice between a match of 3 flirtation tokens versus a match of 3 romance tokens, where the girl's least preferred trait is romance, makes it clear that the best move would be to go with the flirtation match to maximize your affection yield. It gets a bit more complicated than that the deeper you get into the game, but that's a bare basic example. How does it get more complicated? Well, that's where date gifts come in. Date gifts are earned by giving girls gifts with the heart icon next to it. The date gifts are then automatically posted to your Honeybee inventory and can be equipped before entering a date. These gifts, the date gifts, have various effects that can help you during dates. Among these effects include perfumes that will increase the number of certain tokens that drop, consuming certain tokens, changing broken heart tokens into something else, consuming sentiment or passion or affection, etc. It becomes very important later in the game to be able to have a strategy that utilizes these date gifts, especially if you're trying to go for certain achievements. You can get away with not using them earlier in the game, but as far as I know, based on my own experience, being successful on dates without these gifts becomes nigh impossible. Date gifts aren't free, however. In dates, the way you are able to give girls date gifts is by earning sentiment, which you can then spend, and each gift costs a different amount of sentiment each. Because of all this, my typical gift loadout emphasizes the accumulation of passion and sentiment. One of these days, I'll figure out how to finish a date with more than 20 moves left over. Speaking of which, you are initially given 20 moves to finish a date, which is accomplished by filling the affection meter at the bottom. After almost every successful date, the amount of affection you have to earn increases. Once you activate Alpha Mode, which is basically Huniepop's post-game, the maximum point number increases indefinitely, rendering every date more difficult than the last one for the rest of eternity. It's hard to describe why Huniepop's Alpha Mode post-game is so good, but the puzzle gameplay is incredibly engaging. I've played quite a few of these style of games, but Huniepop continues to keep me coming back more than the others, simply because not only the challenge of alpha mode, but also how satisfying it is to leverage some more advanced strategies in the game and earning huge combos and points in a single move because of it. In my less than legally acquired copy of the game, I probably put in over 100 hours, most of which were logged into the alpha mode post-game. I'll admit I'm not the best at the game, far from it. My strategy is likely not nearly as optimized as it could be, but there is something really exciting about getting down to the wire and just scraping by to success on the last move. Alpha mode is kind of like a game of limbo, where every round makes you question if you're really going to make it this time, and somehow you do. It's so great and I love it. It's what helps make Huniepop sit among one of my favorite games of all time. But that isn't the only puzzle gameplay mode present in the game. Stated at the very beginning of the game, the main goal of Huniepop is to eventually spend the night with every girl. Spending the night is accomplished by successfully completing 4 dates with each individual girl. The 4th date must be successfully completed at night in order to trigger the scene where you get to spend the night with them. Spending the night with a girl requires you to play the puzzle gameplay again, except it handles a little differently. First of all, there is no longer a move limit. The affection meter also has a much lower goal than normal. The tokens have an altered appearance, and aside from still being able to move those tokens the full length and height of the grid, and the omission of broken heart tokens, the tokens all contribute to the affection meter score, and there are no date gifts. For all intents and purposes, this mode functions closer to what other Match 3 style games are like. The main difference here is that the affection meter automatically depletes once you earn affection. This mode incentivizes rapid matchmaking, which makes sense given the innuendo of building something up and pushing it over the edge that the spending the night euphemism suggests. Once you reach the 50% point of the affection meter, you finally get to see that particular girl's in-game model topless, if that's your thing. In any event, this mode is unfailable. You can let the meter deplete and nothing will happen. You just need to continue. It's not really meant to be deep in as much as it's meant to be a reward for the hard work that it potentially took to get to that point. Weirdly enough, I find this part of the game to be the least memorable. I know that sounds unbelievable, but I find this aspect to be more of a fact of the game than a necessarily engaging part of it. But it's a natural reward that makes perfect sense for the game, and I can't fault it for that. It's perfectly fine for what it is, and the reward it grants you at the end is worth it, if nothing else. The artwork in this game is really good. I love the character designs especially. Much like this style of game, there are 2 different character art styles. You will spend most of your time interacting with and seeing the in-game models, which are really good. They feature a surprisingly large array of different unlockable outfits and hairstyles, which you can have them wear by selecting them in your Honeybee, or, like me, toggle them to the random setting and seeing the different combinations every time you meet them. They are mostly static, although there are subtle changes in facial expressions and basic lip syncing. However, you can also unlock CGs of each character as you progress through the game. CGs are basically complex static images of characters in a game posed and performing some kind of action. This is a staple in games of this kind, and you are able to unlock and look at these images after unlocking them through your Honeybee. These images are unlocked after successfully completing dates. They manifest in the form of risque text messages that slowly escalate over the game as you get closer to them, until the final one is unlocked, which presumably shows the aftermath of spending the night with them. The nature of these images is suggestive at best, but the quality of the artwork is still great, or at least I think so, and I think most people do. The character models look like highly refined versions of their in-game models, and the mix of staging, use of color, simulation of focal depth and lighting, it's what sets this art apart from your typical free Rule 34, for example. The visuals aren't the only aspect of the game that is well crafted. Huniepop's soundtrack is one of my favorite video game soundtracks ever. Each instrumental track has its own tune and own style that differentiates itself from the other, and yet stays consistent to the overall sonic theme of the game. These tracks have the perfect kind of attention to detail in their production and arrangements, and the quality of the compositions are simple enough that they get hopelessly stuck in your mind for days afterwards, yet still provide a level of complexity that I think music fans who like to listen to instrumental tracks more deeply can still appreciate. I don't normally buy digital music, but Huniepop's soundtrack I made the exception for. It's that good. I don't know how else to describe it without going into a track-for-track review, but the energy of these tracks are sensitive to their respective environments and time of day in such a way that I feel could be easily overlooked just because of how perfectly they seem to fit every scene. Now let's talk about the characters. Each girl has their own highly distinct personality, which is important for a game of this kind with dating elements. Of course, you're meant to get with all of them rather than just pick one like in most dating sims, but Huniepop's characters are written in such a way that everyone who plays this game is bound to find at least one character to be their favorite. Let's go down the line, shall we? Belly's personality is centered around the idea of spirituality and moral awareness. That's the best way I can describe it, at least. Some may or may not find it humorous that they would reserve this kind of vague spirituality character motif for the one of presumably South Asian descent, but in any case, that's really only the surface level of her character. It's a bit clear in your interactions with her that she has more of an inclination towards the lewd than she might let on. The way she frames questions puts it in a way that seems innocent, but based on the content of the conversations and the nature of the pictures she sends you, her moralistic spiritual beliefs are also the engine that drives her drive, so to speak. In other words, she acts more innocent than she really is. Personally, I've always had a soft spot for her, and she did rank relatively high on my list of favorites from this game in the past. And I think that still holds for the most part, but some of the ways she talks kinda lost its charm on me after a while. Although I still like her, and I do revisit her from time to time in the game. Jessie is one of the most experienced of the girls you meet in Huniepop. She's an adult star who is pretty successful, and it's clear that she is Tiffany's mom. Her demeanor is that of a mature, famous cam girl, and the voice they have for her sells that perfectly. She is pretty straightforward and honest about things, and despite her career path being the way it is, it's also clear that she has an affinity for innocent things and nostalgic times. The gifts that she likes carry a childhood appeal, which suggests a possible deeper part of her personality that doesn't come out, at least not here. For me, I was never the biggest fan of Jessie, but over time I've warmed up to her. She's probably not among my most favorite characters, but she does have more heart than I gave her credit for, even though she does everything she can to mask it. That's the nature of showbiz though, so I can't blame her. Because I live in Japan, I find it pretty funny that Aiko Yumi is Aiko's full name, simply because Yumi is typically a first name, and you know what they say about people with first names. Anyway, I always liked Aiko. She's your typical hot teacher working as a physics professor at the local university. She's pretty young for a professor. That's impressive, even though she apparently hates it. Aiko has no reservations about talking about lewd stuff as plainly as possible. She's exhausted from work and does as much as she can to have the most fun she can outside of her job. The thing I find funny about her is the fact that her voice sounded really similar to someone I once knew, and so some of those voice clips were a little unsettling to hear. But she still ranks high for me. She has a relaxed sense of humor, and her carefree demeanor is respectable, even when you're giving her racially stereotypical gifts. No dating sim is complete without its own Tiffany. Tiffany is your typical girl next door. She's nice, kind, polite. She sugarcoats her real thoughts if they are negative. Her cadence, her word choice, it's all very nice. I'm not gonna lie, as likable as she would be for a lot of people, this is just plain and milquetoast for me. Everything about her is normal. Yeah, you can say and do riskier stuff with her, but it's all still well within the safe category. Sure, she's active and she has no qualms with sending you upskirt photos at the outset, but I just can't get that into it personally. This is all subjective, of course, and for all intents and purposes, she's a great fit for the game. Someone has to fill this role, but I'm just not a fan of this archetype. I've known someone like this in real life, and even then, it was still like, yeah. I know certain pickup artists, playboy types out there would love this type because this type of person is easy to get with if you know how to exploit their dirty side, and that's definitely Tiffany's intended appeal. But she's always been and will probably remain pretty meh for me for a long time. Q Sugar Dust is arguably what peak female performance looks like. Joking aside, I really like Q. Even now, she still lives up to all the hype I felt for her back when I first played the game in 2017. Q is a love fairy who has been assigned to help you improve your skill with the ladies. She's your dating coach, but she's still kind of like your invisible wingman. She gives you instructions, shows you the ropes, but is also kind of a bro. I don't know how else to explain it, but of all the characters in this game, Q is the one I feel most strongly that if I were to meet her in real life, I would get along with her really well. She's kind of a meme lord, and the moment I heard her say bouse and noise, I knew that there would be no way she wouldn't be anything less than one of my top 3 favorite characters in this game. It's really that bro energy. Not only in the joking way she talks, but also the way she scolds you too. When she scolds you for failing a date, saying something to the effect of, dude, you really shouldn't still be failing dates this late in the game, is the kind of fourth wall break that is tasteful. In a world where fourth wall breaks have become a bit passé, it's kind of refreshing to see an example of it that isn't forced. I mean, this is a Sonic fan saying this. Maybe she will win you over at first with her outfits, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who, when you ask why they like her, the first thing they mention would be anything other than how funny she is. Full disclosure, but I actually knew someone in real life who was almost exactly like Nikki, so that familiarity with her kind of character might be one of the reasons why I like her so much. Nikki is the introverted one. She works as a barista even though she hates interacting with people most of the time. She's friends with Tiffany and Audrey somehow, but she is far from outgoing. She likes games, especially classic games. She's retro-maxing. The gifts you give her are all based on real-world classic games and game hardware. She mentions that she's building a collection of classic and rare game hardware, and your gifts really help her out with that. I think you could kind of put her under the modern label of Gooner Girl these days, maybe. She doesn't act like it outwardly, but her messages reveal, well, something else. Actually, when juxtaposed with Audrey, it's kind of shocking. But I like Nikki. If you can vibe with the stuff she likes and you don't mind the way she talks or how she might be susceptible to buying into weird theories, she's pretty chill. Lola has typically ranked the lowest in my list of favorite characters in Huniepop. Lola is a very career-oriented person, and her availability in the game is probably the most varied compared to the rest of them. The reason she was always ranked at the bottom of my ranking list is mostly due to the fact that she always comes off to me as one of those people who seemed to spend more time talking about how busy they are than actually being busy. I've known plenty of people like that before in the past, and it was really annoying. And so I was immediately put off by her busybody personality. Coming back to Huniepop now and getting to know Lola again, I have to say at least this iteration of her is actually a lot more respectable than I remember. I might even admit that she is likable. Wow. How gracious of me. I know. I still don't know why she had to treat Nikki the way she did when you first met her at the cafe, but besides that, I actually like Lola quite a bit more than I did when I first played the game. She's about the grind, and I don't know, I gotta respect that. When you look at the individual parts of Audrey, almost everything about her is something I really dislike. She's a college student who doesn't have a major. In fact, she's thinking about dropping out. So essentially, she's just wasting time and money. She's extremely rude. She smokes cigarettes and dabbles with drugs, including narcotics. She's very loud. She's mean to her friends. Her language is harsh and abrasive. Her future planning is so short-sighted. All she really is concerned about is who she's going to Lusty's nightclub with and which of her orbiter simps' money she'll be spending at the mall today. And to top it all off, her cadence and her accent has the ever so subtle but still there Valley Girl drawl. And yet, despite all of that, and in fact, because of all of that, I absolutely love her. Much like with Q, my opinion of her was basically love at first sight. I love her backhanded compliments, her tone, her accent, her insults, It's so perfectly executed, it's almost unbelievable. Some might say she's the obligatory tsundere character, but I really can't agree. Tsunderes hide their feelings. They mask how they really feel, but Audrey really doesn't. I think she's pretty transparent. Even though the plot twist is that she's a virgin before she spends the night with you, and the only one of the characters like that, she never really hides that fact. I'm sure if you asked, she'd answer honestly. There is a veracity to her character and demeanor that is just counter to what a tsundere is, and I think that's what makes her character so special from the typical typecast character tropes. Kiana was another character that would typically rank near the bottom of my list for Huniepop characters, and I still think she would probably rank lower still, but not for dislike of her. Kiana is a young single mom who dropped out of high school and now works as a hairdresser at the mall. She's a gym rat and wakes up early in the morning so that she can go straight to the gym for her morning workouts. I do feel that aside from these facts, the reason why she ranks so low on my list historically is because she seems to be a lot like Tiffany as far as plainness is concerned. She's on the wilder side of plain, sure, but she also yells a lot. Even when she doesn't have to, she is always yelling, and I don't really know why. People who shout all the time aren't really my jam, as it turns out. Unless you're Audrey.
What's wrong? Did I hurt your whore feelings?
If you're Audrey, you can blow up the moon for all I care. I also don't really relate to people whose main hobby is working out at the gym, which is another way I can relate to Audrey.
What do you want?
She's not bad, but I guess I find her to be mostly forgettable aside from her constant yelling. Momo is one of the secret characters you can unlock by leaving a fish at the park. She is the game's Catgirl character, and it is comically unclear whether or not she's actually a stray cat or some random homeless girl. She knows a lot about cats and will often quiz you about them. Being a cat is pretty much her entire personality. She kind of fills the space of being that childlike female character you have to teach about the world and be romantically involved with at the same time. It's one of those highly criticized male fantasy tropes that I've heard talked about before. Momo is an interesting character. A few years ago, I would have ranked her among the top, but these days, I'm really not that sure anymore. Her babyish demeanor isn't really my favorite thing, but there is an obvious appeal, I suppose. But some people also just like the Catgirl aesthetic. I mean, is that tale real or... In any event, buy her yarn and scratching boards, and she'll just keep herself occupied with those while she waits for you to come home. That's just how she is. Celeste is unlocked by unlocking Q and giving her your dirty magazine, for which she exchanges with a strange object. Then you take the strange object to the beach at night and try to leave, and then she comes to take it from you. Celeste is one of the older characters in the game, and she is also an alien. She's a bounty hunter who is hired to execute jobs across the galaxy for money. Her ship crash landed, and she's waiting for her ship to be repaired. She talks in a way that is definitely more eloquent than the other girls, if a bit awkward relative to them. I really like the way she talks, though. In a way, it almost feels like she's speaking my language. I don't exactly know what that says about me, but I really like it. She quizzes you with trivia about space as well as herself. If you know basic facts about the solar system, then they are pretty easy, but if you don't, you might struggle. Well, unless you have a smartphone and access to Google. But Celeste is pretty great. I've definitely grown to appreciate her more, although I think I've always liked her. She's a bit, well, alien in her disposition, but I like that kind of stuff. Probably more than the whole cat girl thing, if I'm going to be honest. Arguably, the game's final boss, Venus, is Q's boss. Once you successfully spend the night with Q, you will unlock Venus, and it's up to you as your final test in the story to spend the night with the goddess of love herself. She is royalty, and thus acts as such. Her voice, her outfits, her taste in things, her alcohol tolerance, it all screams royalty, who cannot be easily tricked into things where so many others might. She's almost like Jessie on steroids, with the main difference being that her mere existence brings suitors to her without the need for exhibitionism. Of course, she does send you lewd photos, but even the non-lewd ones have a strong sense of erotic undertones that can only be produced by someone of her character. Venus isn't my favorite character, but she is respectable, and the way she quizzes you about the other girls is like how Q does, but on hard mode. I mean, including what color eyes what girl has. Her questions are about small details about them, and you had better notice, and you can't look at your honeybee to help you. It will only greet you with a message calling you out for being a cheater. For Venus, you just have to know. But once you are finally successful with Venus, you really do feel like you've earned it, despite the lack of fanfare for doing so. I know there are probably some smaller aspects about Huniepop that I may have overlooked, but I think you can get a good picture of what I'm talking about here. Huniepop is a near-perfect, if not perfect, game. It may have begun life as one of those viral games that lets players could get some easy views from playing, but its gameplay design, writing, and presentation are so good that over a decade later, after the viral meme hype has long since faded away, we are left with one of the best examples of a game of this style. It's no wonder that in the wake of Huniepop, we would end up getting countless copycat games while we waited for a sequel. I think it's this fact that helps serve as proof that Huniepop had a significant effect on gaming culture. Small and niche as its reach might have been, contained within the world of NSFW puzzle games, it still stands tall as one of the premier examples of one of these games done right. Censored or not, it wouldn't have the long shelf life it does were it not for its core gameplay, and I think that is evidence for a legitimately good game.
My underside has become lubricated. I yearn to be touched.
Looking back, it's kind of hard to believe that going straight from Huniepop, a game of any kind, sequel or spin-off, would come so quickly, but alas, that's what we got with HunieCam Studio. Based on a large cast consisting of many of the same characters from Huniepop, plus some new characters, this game kind of takes place in an alternate dimension from the first game, or something. Actually, I don't know how this game fits within the entire series canon, since there are plot points that do carry over from Huniepop here and then to Huniepop 2 as well, specifically if you read the character descriptions. I have to admit that HunieCam Studio is a game I've been aware of for about as long as I've known about Huniepop, but When I first got around to actually playing this game back in 2020, I really didn't have much of a strong opinion about it, other than I wasn't really that into it. That was mostly because of the fact that here was a game that completely departed from the Match 3 puzzle gameplay of the first game in favor of some kind of business management style instead, which to me felt totally off-brand for a game that was a sequel to a puzzle/dating sim. So I played through it a couple of times, failed miserably, and put it down in favor of, I don't know, probably Quake, if I'm remembering that correctly. Needless to say, thanks to this introduction I had with this game, despite being practically 5 years removed from it, I was not exactly thrilled to start this game again. I wasn't, nor am I even, as I write this, sure what exactly my completion status for this game is. I'm not particularly good at games of this kind, and I do have strong doubts about my ability to actually get the best ending in a reasonable amount of time. I decided I would at least play through the game enough to fill all the save slots and hope that one of those attempts I would get at least a solid ending. And indeed, I did end up managing that, so that's good enough for me. But that isn't to say that my opinion of HunieCam Studio has remained the same. But first, let's talk about what exactly this game is. As I mentioned before, this is a far cry from the Match 3 puzzle gameplay of the original Huniepop, and it has shirked that gameplay style for a business management/tycoon gameplay style instead. On the face of it, the game is simple enough. You hire girls to do cam shows to earn you money, which you use to expand your business in order to earn more fans. Fans are the key to success in this game. You need to finish the game having earned a certain number of fans by the end in order to get certain trophies to earn tokens, which can be used to unlock the outfits of different characters you unlock in the game by hiring them. You are tasked with amassing as many fans as possible in just 21 days. You can go for longer after the game is over to just play around if you like, but it won't earn you anything unless you're trying to unlock certain achievements that aren't tied to earning certain trophies. The 21-day period only takes between 60 to 90 minutes, but because of the way this game is set up, it is inconceivably replayable. Huniepot seems to have a talent for designing simple games which have replay values that offer far more than what you pay for when you buy the game. The way this game is set up, unless you know exactly what to do and the best strategy to employ to be successful, you're probably not going to have a very high chance of getting a favorable ending on your first try. This game absolutely begs to be replayed several times. Just getting one ending isn't enough, especially if you can't even manage one of the trophies by the end of the 21 days. Okay, I've mentioned them a million times by now. At the end of the 21 days, you have the ability to earn certain trophies depending on the number of followers you end the time period with. They are bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and diamond. The minimum number of followers you must end with to earn each of these trophies respectively are 5,000, 10,000, 25,000, 50,000, and 100,000. I would show you these trophies, but I have to censor them because I'm pretty sure YouTube wouldn't be so happy about the imagery they offer. Needless to say, this is still in the Huniepop universe, unmistakably so. One of the biggest learning curves for me to get over in this game is focusing on building fans and not wealth. I often found myself in my first couple of runs of this game trying to hoard as much money as possible and being very stingy with how I spent it. This is because I did have one run where I went into the red, couldn't recover, and subsequently couldn't make payroll the next day, thus ending the game prematurely. Despite being so simple, it does have quite a bit you have to manage when you itemize it. You have 8 unlockable slots in which you can hire girls, and these are unlocked via the Invest tab. Investments are essentially upgrades you can make to your business. For example, a very useful one in the mid-late game is the automation, which will automatically collect things like fans, revenue, drinks, and cigarettes in fixed time intervals. Of course, the more you upgrade that, the faster it collects those things. You can also buy upgrades to your infrastructure, unlock more slots so you can hire more girls, unlock more inventory slots for the girls, increase the number by which fans and revenue are collected, etc. Fans and revenue are collected manually and in separate places. The Cam Studio is where revenue is generated, and the Photo Studio is where fans are generated. Each of these places are very important, and it's equally important to maximize the output of these places by utilizing your staff in the most effective and, dare I say, synergistic way possible. Because of the fact that you're on a time limit, it can kind of feel like a juggling act, and while I'll be the first to admit that I'm far from a master of this style of game, there is something incredibly satisfying about how surprisingly rapid-fire this management system can get. I'm sorry that this description is so all over the place, but there are so many elements of this game that hold equal importance and influence to each other, it's hard to prioritize which to emphasize first like it was in Huniepop. But since we're on the topic of revenue and fans, where those resources are generated, let's talk about the girls. Girls can be recruited at the big recruitment agency building in the center of town. Only other girls can go to recruit other girls. However, more on that later. Each girl has her own stats that you might want to consider before hiring. They have style and talent levels. Style determines the number of fans they earn after doing photo shoots and the photo studio. And their talent stat determines how much money she earns at the cam studio. The higher each of these levels are, the more they might earn. They also have fetish niches that they fill. These can be incredibly useful when buying ads for new fans. More on that later as well. Each girl has 2 fetishes that she satisfies by default, but can be expanded on later. There is also a section dedicated to their coping mechanisms, their smoking and drinking habits. These determine how often they consume alcohol and cigarettes, which are very important resources you have to keep track of and maintain as well. Since if you run out of those every time they go to smoke or drink, if those resources are at 0, their stress stat will rise by 10%, dramatically decreasing their productivity. Giving girls tasks will add to their stress stat as well, and the only way to clear their stress level is to send them to the day spa. The higher their stress level when entering the spa, the longer it will take for them to recover. Girls also have inventory slots that can be unlocked through the investment tab. Once they have inventory slots, you can then send girls to the adult store and you will be given a random set of items to choose from to give one of the girls for extra perks. This could be an item that could help expand their fetish appeal, supplement their alcohol or cigarette habit, reduce their stress, double their productivity, help them earn a percentage of fans after doing cam shows, etc. Girls also have salaries that you must pay by the end of the day. Your payroll expenses are very important to meet and manage. The starter girls only charge $1 per hour, but some girls can go up to $64 per hour, and in those cases, it's very important to use their time extremely effectively unless you already have strong enough revenue to still break a profit by the end of every day, regardless of what she charges. As I've said before, once you go into the red and you don't recover within 24 hours of the most recent payroll deadline, the game ends instantly and you get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir. After all, if a business can't pay for its talent, then that business is a failure. Q Sugar Dust will not forgive insolvency. Even though money isn't technically the aim of the game, but that's besides the point. The talent and style stats of the girls can be increased by sending them to go dancing or shopping, respectively. These places can be helpful, I'm sure, but when I did try to improve their stats, the amount of time I lost sending them to these places compared to the return on that time I got in earned revenue and fans was a bit too little, I think. It seems that many agree, since a prominent guide written by someone in the Steam community advises against using them at all if you want a chance at the Diamond Trophy. This might be the one oversight by the game, though. I haven't yet achieved the Diamond Trophy, so I don't really feel comfortable making such an assertion, at least so strongly, without having the experience myself, so take that with a grain of salt. But one thing that is clear you should never send the girls off to do is escorting. Escorting is a bad idea, because unless they are armed with protection, something that can only be acquired if the RNG generates it as a choice from the trip to the adult store, the chances are almost certain that she will get an STD. And once she has an STD, she will no longer be able to perform cam shows unless you can treat or cure it. This is easier said than done because, again, you are at the mercy of the game's RNG to even have a chance to get it. Honestly, it's far too risky, and even if it brings in a lot of revenue in such a short time, it's not really worth the risk or preparation in the same way as grinding out cam shows is. There's far less risk and overhead for a lot more potential profits in the long run. In my, albeit limited experience, buying promos will give you the best chance at success at achieving your goal to one of the big milestone fan numbers. If you are aiming for trophies, this is as essential as anything else. Promos are basically ad space that you pay for on other sites to bring people into your cam shows. The more fans a girl has, the more money she can make, and the more fetishes she satisfies, the more fans she can earn thanks to crossover appeal. This combination of mechanics kind of renders the fashion store and dance club obsolete, perhaps. This is mainly because promos can open the door for fetishes that a girl can fill by getting her a related item at the adult store, which will increase her appeal and win her more fans, both in her real-time count as well as net her more fans after photo shoots and more money after performing at cam shows at the HunieCam Studio. They feed into each other in an incredibly organic way, and when you get that engine going, it could potentially accelerate into something resembling an exponential curve if you play smart. Since promos are bought with money, and more fans could earn you more money, you can afford new promos once they regenerate at the beginning of every day. As you buy more promos, they will become more expensive, but net you more fans. You will eventually get to a point where thousands of fans will cost tens of thousands of dollars, but it's assumed that by that point, you'll be swimming in cash and will have the money to burn. Using any of the buildings in this game will cost you two of your most important resources: time and money. The longer a girl works, the more you will have to pay her. The more you have to pay her, the smaller your margin of profit. The longer she stays in that location, the less time she will have to spend anywhere else, or the less she can do in a single day. Because of this dilemma, there is a very important mechanic that HunieCam Studio introduces. You can actually shave time off a girl's working time by clicking and holding the location she's at in the same way you would collect resources. This is essential because time saved means money made, and investing in this increases the duration of time that can be rushed and can really help compound those benefits if your timing is correct. Of course, different activities demand certain amounts of time spent at those activities, but really it's a great way to save money, especially if it's a particularly expensive girl who is being paid to do something that doesn't generate revenue. After dedicating the time to HunieCam Studio that I have for this video, I've come to really appreciate this game a lot more than I did when I first played it. Even though I'm still not particularly great at games of this style, I couldn't help but to find its overlapping synergistic mechanics to be intoxicatingly fun to make use of to reach certain fan goals in every playthrough I attempted. While playing it, I couldn't help but to feel as though this game was better than it had any right to be, especially considering how soon after Huniepop it came out. From a gameplay mechanics standpoint, and from interacting with its interface and its overall design, its replayability, it is a potentially addicting gameplay loop that I might say is a bit overlooked maybe. I think the only complaint I have about this game is that every time you start up a new save, you have to sit through the introductory part of the tutorial. You can skip all the tutorials if you want with one click, but you still have to sit through the introduction. And given how it's the same every time and the text scrolls pretty slowly, it can be a little tedious. But if that's the only real complaint I can come up with, which is only a quality of life issue anyway, I think that just goes to show how solid a core this game really has. I think perhaps the most controversial part of HunieCam Studio is its art direction. It is a pretty stark departure from Huniepop, and I can't help but to get the feeling that it's more mid-2000s Cartoon Network style as opposed to the anime style artwork probably put some people off. At least I can speak for myself when I say that. When I first saw how different the game looked from the original, part of me wondered if it was really by the same developer or if it was some cheap fan-made game. But after spending some quality time with the game, I can actually appreciate its aesthetic based on its own merits. This time, there are 18 characters, and the ones returning from Huniepop have some changes made to their designs, especially Audrey. I genuinely felt that Audrey was the only character that was almost unrecognizable from her original design in Huniepop. But after getting used to it, it really didn't matter to me. The others resemble their original designs very closely. Despite their more simplified look, I find the aesthetic to be pretty fitting for a game of such a comparatively small scale to its predecessor. Each girl has 5 different outfits and hairstyles that can be unlocked with tokens earned by completing the main story. Once all the hairstyles and outfits are unlocked, you will unlock a CG of each character, presumably in the midst of doing a cam performance. It's pretty risque, but it isn't nearly as NSFW as Huniepop. I would even dare to say that I've seen reels on Instagram with spicier content than what is on offer in the CGs here in HunieCam Studio. That fact may or may not be worth grinding for the tokens for some, but I could see myself grinding for it if for no other reason than the achievement that comes with doing so. The art direction, I believe, makes sense. A more simplified art style for a spin-off game of a super popular, semi-viral puzzle game that came out just before just makes sense given the time constraints. I would rather have a more simplified, albeit totally original art style with fewer assets than a game that attempts to copy its predecessor with lower quality imitation work or, even worse, recycled assets. HunieCam Studio looks perfectly fine, and again, I've grown kind of accustomed to it. Its style feels like a bit of a throwback to me, and there's something oddly nostalgic about it, so I really don't mind. The limited scope of HunieCam Studio doesn't stop at the simplified art style, but it also extends to the soundtrack as well. But just because the soundtrack is working around the limitations of the game's general scope doesn't mean that it can't be good. This game probably has a handful of tracks, maybe 5? I didn't count, actually. The music you'll be hearing the most is during gameplay when the soundtrack follows your day-to-day seamlessly, transitioning between morning, afternoon, and night tracks. These themes are probably the most stubborn earworms I've ever heard in a game. Maybe it's just easy for music to get stuck in my head, I don't know, but I can go a day or more without touching the game and still get one of its motifs stuck in my head. They aren't as sonically or harmonically complex as the Huniepop soundtrack is, but it still maintains an overall sonic continuity with the original game in its core instrumentation. That is to say, it still sounds very much like a Huniepop game. What it lacks in complexity and number, it makes up for in its sheer earworminess. Even as of writing this script, I had it stuck in my head, and I hadn't played the game in 2 days. I actually hear it as the soundtrack to my dreams sometimes. There really isn't much to say about the characters in this game. Aside from their individual stats, which vary somewhat, generally speaking, HunieCam Studio isn't really nearly as character-driven as its predecessor. Of course, we do have a number of characters returning from Huniepop, and we do have some new characters as well, but for the most part, concerning all the characters, they really aren't so memorable aside from their unlockable outfits and hairstyles, though I reckon most people don't really bother to unlock all of those either. It's too bad, since this is the only other game Audrey appears in, and she really doesn't contribute much aside from her backstory. She's reeling from a breakup with maybe, possibly, you from the previous game. I mean, it's suggested anyway, lightly. HunieCam Studio is, all in all, a really great game. Honestly, a game coming out so soon after such a pristinely designed game like Huniepop has no right being as good as HunieCam Studio ended up becoming. I went into it with a sense of trepidation, but came out of it wanting to continue playing to unlock everything, even though time was running short for this video. I'm not sure if I'm good enough to be able to unlock all the achievements for the game, but part of me would really like to try to go for it. But even with my experience as of the making of this video, the game has well exceeded my expectations, born out of my less than stellar first impressions of the game back in 2020. I know that since this is a spin-off, this game was probably not as widely known as other games in the series. After all, this game is very different from the base Huniepop series. There is absolutely nothing in common with HunieCam Studio aside from the appearance of past characters and the inclusion of the Honey moniker in the name's title. Because of this, looking back retrospectively on how the game might have evolved, the original Huniepop gameplay is both impossible or incredibly easy, depending on who you ask. It's a completely different game that asks very different things of you. While there is still definitely a stat-building element of the game and a system that works like a positive feedback loop, its implementation and the way it develops over the course of gameplay is still quite fundamentally different, since each game is totally different. Huniepop is designed to have its difficulty scale with your stat progression over the course of the game, while HunieCam Studio's campaign is much shorter and aims for the player to build a business within a short time frame that grows along the lines of something closest to an exponential curve. This difference might put Huniepop players off. It did for me, but if you can learn it and play through it multiple times and keep developing your strategy, it does offer a shockingly impressive and addicting gameplay loop that could potentially keep you trying again and again for more attempts than you originally anticipated.
Or you can play again, try to beat your score, and earn some more wardrobe tokens. It's up to you. Personally, I don't really care, mostly because I'm not real. Later!
On February 9th, 2021, the long-awaited sequel to Huniepop was finally unleashed upon the world, and I was there that day. I think Huniepop 2 Double Date, I'll call it Huniepop 2 from now on, might have been the first game I ever got the day it came out. Like, ever in my life. I didn't think much of it in the past. While I did understand the purpose behind many gamers' push to avoid buying games on launch day to disincentivize publishers, forcing developers to push out unfinished games, honestly, for me, I can't say my lack of buying games the day they came out were for any noble cause. Either thanks to being unaware, not having the proper hardware to run the game, or not having the money to buy the game the day it came out, I never bought games on release day until on that fateful day when Huniepop 2 dropped. And man, it taught me a valuable lesson. If you were there when Huniepop 2 released, you likely know exactly what I mean when I say that. But if you don't, let's have a short story time if you'll indulge me. I was pretty excited for Huniepop 2 when I first learned of its imminent release. Hearing about it again made me want to play the first game again, and it was at that point when I actually went and bought Huniepop and HunieCam Studio on Steam. I played through Huniepop for the first time in a long time and played through countless rounds of the Alpha Mode challenge. The game was just as fun as I remembered, and while I decided to stay away from promotional material about Huniepop 2 so that I could experience everything about the game for the first time after buying it, I was confident that my practice I had with the first game would make Huniepop 2 a cinch. I need to emphasize that fact. I was very confident in my puzzle abilities. Little did I know what lay ahead. I bought the game, booted it up, and decided to go all in and began my first playthrough ever on incel difficulty. In the ensuing 8 hours of almost continuous gameplay, I managed to successfully complete one date. Upon its release, Huniepop 2 sold really well and was extremely well received, with one minor complaint. The difficulty was a bit much. Apparently, even the normal difficulty was too much for some people, and since I was on Incel difficulty, which is the highest difficulty setting in the game, it was insane, at least from my experience, or my memory of the experience. It was absolutely crazy just how often I found myself being scolded at the end of another failed date and seeing that failure screen over and over and over again. Eventually, I did manage to just almost get there, as in to the end of the game, but one date had me totally stumped, and eventually, after 30 hours, I finally decided to step away from the game and take a break. I was a bit burnt out. This was even after the patch which adjusted the difficulty balancing of the game had come out. But I had made a grave mistake, thinking that I could breeze my way through this game on my first run on the highest difficulty setting. An act of hubris on my part, but I knew eventually I would return to see the end of the game. I just never thought that it would take 4 years and this video for me to finally get around to it. The presentation of Huniepop 2's story is, dare I say, perfect for a series with this kind of tone. It kind of follows a popular Hollywood trope where a comedy movie or a TV show is seeing a sequel or first feature-length release that was previously not considered. What I mean by this is that, in contrast to its prequel, which featured a story which was very simple and grounded, Huniepop 2's story is absolutely off the wall. The scope is comically large, and the way Q narrates the introduction, coupled with the epic music and the way your character is introduced in the game, is so cliche but works excessively well here. I think it goes without saying that this introduction and this kind of story are exactly the kind of cliche that was intended for a series this cheeky. But even when it is a deliberate decision by writers, it can still come off as a bit tired. Since Huniepop 2 leans so far into it with such conviction, however, I do think that Huniepop 2 is successful in delivering its intended humor with such perfection that I can't quite find the best word to describe it. Needless to say, I got a kick out of the quest you are sent on and why Q is seeking you out again. To do match 3 puzzles, to date girls, and eventually get lucky with them, and why it's so important it must happen this way again, as opposed to last time. There is a reason why Huniepop 2's subtitle is Double Date, and it's not just because it's the sequel. Strangely, just like Mario Kart Double Dash, which required 2 characters to work as a team for kart racing, Huniepop 2 now asks you to date 2 characters simultaneously. This is the game's dominant mechanic and is also the linchpin of its difficulty. Huniepop 2 is still quite a bit more difficult than its predecessor because of this design decision. But because, much like how Huniepop asked a bit more from you than to simply match 3 tokens of the same color, but to use greater discretion and thought with regard to preferences, gifts, and stats, Huniepop 2 introduces a number of new elements to consider during the puzzle's gameplay and expand even further and arguably a more granular level than before. It's not more difficult because of RNG, but more so because it presents you with even more to consider than you might have in the past. When I first heard that you were going to be required to date 2 girls at once, I was a bit surprised. How do you pull something like that off within the Match 3 framework of the original? Well, it's surprisingly intuitive, actually. Once again, each girl has her own stats, and from the beginning, at least, all you need to worry about is what tokens are most and least favorite, her preferred non-date gifts, and her stamina. The stamina bar in particular makes its comeback in Huniepop 2 in a huge way. Basically, on dates you are essentially asked to juggle the girls going back and forth between them based on a number of different variables, the main one of which is their stamina. This time, it follows them into dates, and you need to be conscientious of how many moves they have in them and the size of the moves they can handle before exhaustion. You can match stamina tokens to fill their stamina bar, of course, but more often than not, you'll likely find yourself switching to the next girl and making moves on her instead. Honestly, it's pretty easy going at first, but eventually you do start running into issues where your score goals start to get a bit out of reach and you'll start needing to upgrade your various stats. Huniepop 2 revamps its upgrade systems from the first game, and it's centered around the honey currency as the only currency in the game, and it manifests itself in the form of fruits, which the girls give you based on your score at the end of dates, success or failure. These fruits all reflect the forms of date tokens that appear in the game: talent, romance, flirtation, and sexuality. Different items in the various parts of the store cost a certain number of one specific corresponding fruit type. There are a number of different types of things you can buy in the store. Food plays a much deeper role in the game now than it did in the first game. Each food comes with its own special effect that it can have on dates, including giving the girl a stamina boost, giving you an extra move before the start of the date, giving a girl a sentiment boost or a passion boost, for example. The trick is that the amount of food a girl can be fed is limited, and the food expires after a fixed duration of time after you buy it. This adds a lot greater depth to the level of strategy behind giving the girls food than what was present in Huniepop. And since this time there is no alcohol and subsequently no intoxication mechanic, the strategy for food has become that much more important, especially in the late game, to give you that edge in being successful while on dates. The next kind of gift you can buy are smoothies. Smoothies are basically the new way you upgrade your stats in Huniepop 2. There is one type of smoothie for each affection token: red, blue, green, and orange. If you give the corresponding smoothie to a girl whose preferred affection token is that color, your stat in that category will increase. You basically give these smoothies out to the girls until you reach the maximum level for maximum point yields for each affection token type. This is a pretty straightforward aspect of the game, but also one that isn't exactly spelled out for you in the same way as it was in the first game. You can also buy date gifts, much like in the first game. However, these gifts can only be given to girls who have inventory slots open to them. I will talk more about that later. Unique gifts are ones that are given to girls who can increase your passion level. In this game, it's actually not entirely apparent, to me at least, what it's actually accomplishing, but it must be doing something. Maybe I missed the explanation for what it does, but whatever it does, it's not as apparent as the first game. Shoes are a different gift which adds to your style stat. Again, I'm not sure what style does, but I think it increases the rate that powered up tokens are generated during dates, which can be extremely helpful for scoring massive points with small moves. Both unique gifts and shoes have hints as to who they might go to, but it does not give away the answer with a star or heart like they do in Huniepop. It's all based on your knowledge of the girls and giving a girl the wrong gift will lead to a rejection of that gift. Much like in Huniepop, all of the items in the store are refreshed in the morning of the next day and are generated randomly. But because not all of the slots are filled in Huniepop 2 like they are in Huniepop, you will have to approach which gifts you give with some level of strategic thinking. Talking to the girls is arguably even more important this time around than it was in the first game. It can net you honey fruits, but as it pertains to dates, it can add to the number of moves you start a date with. Through talking with the girls, you learn more about them, and the more you learn about them, you will unlock inventory slots for them where you can then place date gifts for additional perks when you're on dates. I believe each girl starts with one slot by default, but it becomes advisable to talk to them as the point threshold for successfully completing dates increases. This comes with one caveat, however. Another aspect of Huniepop 2 that makes the game more challenging than the first: baggage. Every girl carries with her some amount of emotional or psychological baggage that can actively work against you during dates. Each girl has 3 different afflictions that you unlock as you talk to her, and they all have some kind of potentially adverse effect on the progression of dates. There are so many different kinds. It's kind of unreasonable to go through them one by one since they are all so character specific. But I say their effects are potentially adverse, only because there are some that can be worked with to help you reach successful conclusions to dates. Some of these baggage effects can be pretty gnarly, but mercifully, at least on the normal difficulty, each girl cycles through one affliction at a time, so you don't have to contend with a combination of all 3 of a single girl's baggage at once, mixed with the other girl's 3 as well. Now, that's how I remember it from my first playthrough, but perhaps I was playing it wrong back then. Baggage can affect literally any aspect of the date: the board, the girl's passion or sentiment, the other girl's passion or sentiment, gifts that have continuous passive effects, the number of remaining moves, everything. You really have to watch out for some, especially for those which switch the effects of broken heart tokens for other types. Those are the easiest to forget about, at least for me. From the nature of the expansion of every aspect of the gameplay in Huniepop 2 from the first game, it's clear that Huniepot really was aiming at making Huniepop 2 a full experience rather than feeling more like an expansion of the first game by rehashing everything from that. With all of these elements of the game combined, what we are left with in terms of the game's Match 3 puzzle gameplay is something far more involved and complex than the first. It turns into a real juggling act. You not only have to pay attention to which tokens are a girl's preferred one, but also which baggage effect is in play, how each girl's baggage interacts with the other and the board and yourself, managing their stamina, and leveraging the effects of gifts in the best way to maximize their effectiveness. Also factoring in the fact that you have to successfully hook up with 24 different pairs of girls means that you will be forced to put up with the different combinations of different baggage for different combinations of girls to finish the game's main story. That's not including the post-game, mind you. Each girl has 4 different pairings that you must finish in order to collect the fairy wings necessary to awaken the Nymphogen. This game asks a lot from the player, and I've seen many refer to this as the Dark Souls of Match 3 games. While of course that's a meme in some ways, this can sometimes feel pretty true when you consider how brutal some of these combinations can be. I think specifically of Ashley and Lillian and Brooke and Polly as examples of particularly nasty potential baggage combinations from my most recent playthrough for this video. On a subjective note, there are some ways you can finesse baggage to your advantage by triggering it purposely. One pretty tricky combination is Nora and Sarah, or Suki's, each of whom have their own want for attention, which manifests itself in different ways in accordance to their characters. Nora will take away a certain fixed percentage, I believe 5%, of your overall earned affection when you divert your attention away from her, and Sarah will periodically steal you away from another girl to pay attention to her, which would, with Nora, trigger Nora's negative effect as well. In this case, I sort of chose the strategy of just focusing on Nora enough to make her exhausted, and alternate between exhausting Nora and Sarah until the day ends. I guess that's not really directly leveraging their respective baggage, but it is a pretty cool way to utilize the stamina mechanic to minimize the adverse effect of baggage could potentially have on dates. I could see having a combination like Lillian and Nora being a really cool one to play around with, since one of Nora's other baggage effects is spawning in more broken heart tokens, and one of Lillian's baggage effects switches the effects of passion and broken heart tokens. I would actually love to play around with a combo like that, especially since my main strategy essentially relies on my opening moves stacking up on as much passion and sentiment as possible for big point earning moves later in the date. Upon fulfilling your destiny and being the hero to satiate the appetites of the Nymphogen, the game unlocks Alpha Mode, which again works the same way as it does in the first Huniepop. Each date you go on gets progressively more difficult to finish after every successful date. But on top of that, there's a new Endless Mode. This one is interesting because it's a marathon date, much like the final boss, except it goes on forever, and it tests to see just how far you can go before losing. These two additions to the game really help to add a ridiculous amount of replay value to this game, and that coupled with the number of possible achievements that can be unlocked replaying the game at a higher difficulty and overcoming these post-game challenges is almost begging for completion, at least for me. Much like the other two games, Huniepot really wanted to make sure that this game would also enjoy a potentially long post-game life for those who spent the money. And for the money, the amount of potential gameplay is incredibly high. Huniepop 2 introduces an almost entirely new cast of characters, and they are definitely a wild cast. Lola is one of two characters from Huniepop who has carried over to Huniepop 2. Years ago, I made a video ranking the original Huniepop cast from worst to best and placed Lola on the bottom of the list. My reason for placing her so close to the bottom kind of makes me laugh now because my reading of her character was based more on her character in Huniepop 2 than it was in the first game. In Huniepop 2, Lola is all about that hustle. While there were elements of that kind of character percolating in the first game, here she is a lot more about the grind. She still works as a flight attendant, but now she is also an aspiring fashion designer and runs a business in her off time promoting and making sales of her products. One of her baggage effects is that after every 5 minutes or so, she will take away an additional move because she needs to get going soon to work on her business. Even though she's on vacation, the grind never stops. This was a supremely annoying effect when I first played the game, and was definitely the biggest source of my frustration with her character back then. But now I have to respect her for her drive to pursue her dream to start her own business. It's very consistent with her character from Huniepop, which was all about the pursuit of new experiences and personal growth. So really, it's a very consistent evolution of her original character. She's also a caffeine fiend, which is a little relatable since I myself drink about 1 liter of coffee every day. And while I would say that her business is much more successful, her moonlighting as a fashion business owner and grinding that in her off time is a bit relatable since I do pretty much the same thing with this YouTube channel. Lola's pretty cool. I've definitely warmed up to her in recent times. Jessie is probably the most tragic character in the entire series. Jessie May returns for the 3rd time in a Honey game. Unfortunately, her life situation has declined since the first game. Because of her choice of profession, presumably at least, her daughter, Tiffany, has stopped associating with her. This goes all the way back to the first game, sure, but things have gotten worse. Time has gone by, and with time also comes age, and unfortunately the hot MILF from Huniepop has now seemed to have crested the hill in her career. Her lifestyle has caught up to her, and she no longer gets jobs in the adult industry. Her smoking has caught up with her, and because of all the videos she's done, she also suffers from a certain insensitivity, so to speak. And the collapse of her career and her health issues are just new additions to her still ongoing issues with her daughter. She's old, tired, sick, and now depressed. She is probably the most sympathetic character in the game, and even though I did a brutal takedown of her in my previous video, hearing her come to this realization in the midst of her depression is kind of sad. At least she still has fans on this island. Lillian returns from her first appearance in HunieCam Studio. She is a rebellious goth girl who was sent here by her parents to give them space, and she is a bit of a handful. She's being watched over by her cousin, Ashley. I love Lillian. She might be my favorite character in this game. Everything that comes out of her mouth is absolutely hilarious, and the cadence she speaks with is one of the biggest contributors to that, along with her accent. Lillian is so edgy and angsty. Everything goes back to either wanting to die, wanting to get laid, food, or wanting to do anything she can to disappoint her parents. She is pretty one-dimensional in this way, but it's absolutely perfect. With the way she is, I can't help but to think of what it would be like if Lillian could be paired with Audrey. They each share obnoxious ways of expressing themselves, and with their similar nihilistic outlook on things dictating the way they navigate their respective lives, it would make for probably the most hilariously joyless combinations imaginable. I can only dream. But with the way she is, Lillian is nearly perfect. The only thing that keeps her from being totally perfect is her barely legal status. I'm not really a fan of that, but just listening to her talk is entertaining enough for me anyway. Zoe also makes her return from HunieCam Studio, and getting to know what she's like aside from managing her as a camgirl talent is an absolute treat. I've always been a bit of a Zoe stan. She kind of fills the gap that Celeste filled in the first game, but here Zoe's personality is able to shine through even stronger. I really like her eccentric way of expressing herself, and even though she is understood to be crazy by the other girls who interact with her, she does actually see the truth that you have come to know. She mentions the butterfly people and the butterfly queen, which can only be a reference to Q or the Love Fairies and Venus respectively, especially thanks to the fact that she mentions that the butterfly queen has long green hair. Zoe is awake. More awake than the other girls, but to save face, you are encouraged to act skeptical towards her. Sometimes she'll also subtly quiz you about the other girls by vaguely describing them and asking you who she might be having visions of. These answers can only be reached by getting to know the other girls, by talking to them, so you better pay attention to what the other girls are like if you want those extra honey fruits. Zoe is really cool. Her cyber chick aesthetic is also great and somehow very fitting of her eccentric personality. She's a weirdo, but much like Celeste, she's my kind of weirdo, and I can't help but to respect that.
It's such a peaceful day, isn't it? I don't think anything could disturb this tranquility. Konnichiwa! O genki desu ka? Excuse me? Sorry, I think I got it wrong. But I'm practicing, I promise.
Wait, I've seen you around recently. You're the new assistant to Mrs. Belrose, right?
I'm Suki. Well, that's my Japanese name anyway.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Suki. I'm Lailani. I work at the hotel. Occasionally the massage spa, too.
Really? I work with a real Japanese girl? Sugoi!
Oh, no, I'm not...
You're tan too, just like me! OMG! Do you also like Yaru fashion?
No, I'm actually Paladin.
Have you been to Shibuya, or Harajuku, or Akihabara? What's it like? Will you take me there sometime?
Well, I'd love to, but I'm not...
I can't believe I'm actually best friends with a tan Japanese girl!
What's that smell? You smell that? It smells like a fucking weeb! Ugh, I have to put up with enough of this shit back home. You think anime is popular down here? You should see Sky Garden. Where do you think the designs for these Love Fairy uniforms came from? Rescue Hotel Girl before this dweeb makes her watch an entire season of some magical Chan girl shit.
Hands down, the most hilarious introduction for a character in this game is Suki, real name Sarah. Sarah is a weeaboo. She loves everything about Japan and Japanese pop culture. She herself presents herself as a gyaru, with her artificial tan and fake hair color, sometimes opting for wigs. Her personality is marked by her incessant need to be extremely genki all the time, maybe emulating what she believes idols to be like, perhaps. In any event, she is meant to be obnoxious to an insane degree, just on the borderline of likability. She is very loud and does everything she can to be like an anime girl, since that's how she believes she needs to act in order to fit in Japanese society. She's very needy, and apparently she has pretty poor hygiene. She is almost a caricature of an American Japanophile, but for me, she goes so far off the deep end in that subculture that she comes back around to be among my favorite characters in the game. She's weird, but the veracity of her weirdness is highly respectable. She makes me laugh, and sometimes that's good enough for me. Lailani is a Polynesian girl who works as part of the hotel staff at the Ina da Puna Vacation Resort in Huniepop 2, the setting of the game. Lailani is probably the most normal girl of the cast. She might be Huniepop 2's equivalent to Tiffany, the more vanilla type who acts as the game's so-called straight man when juxtaposed to the other cast of characters. Lailani, however, does not fall into the same trap as Tiffany in the first game. Lailani as a character benefits immensely from the baggage mechanic of the game. Thanks to her various dispositions, because she is so vanilla, it adds a much needed third dimension to her character to help her stand out in a better way and makes her more memorable as a result. Navigating her baggage while on dates really shows how much character building potential there is. Even a character who has such a vanilla personality at first shows that in the vanilla-ness there are still points of sensitivity because of it. In other words, even normal has its abnormalities, and that's what helps make Leilani so likable and memorable as a character. Rather than just being a generic nice girl with a freaky side, here we can dive deeper into her opinions and attitudes about certain things, even adult things. It doesn't just come out of nowhere like it seems to with Tiffany. She's open about it, and in a limited capacity that doesn't really leave her comfort zone. She won't accept certain lewd gifts and reject sexuality matches only until after you've made 15 moves on her. It's strict, but effective character building without needing to say a lot, which in turn helps make your success with her on dates feel satisfying. In Grand Theft Auto 4, Laszlo mentions in his radio show Integrity 2.0 that one of his conquests was a mentally challenged girl who liked to eat pennies. Candace is very evocative of that story every time I interact with her. Candace is an exotic dancer who faces some intellectual challenges. She kind of plays the role of the lovable idiot, maybe. Everything about her circles back to her difficulty to process information, to learn new things, remember important things, and have any concept of anything outside of what she does professionally. She also speaks slowly and with a kind of Southern American accent I like to refer to as one of the Confederate accents. Actually, I've recently gotten into North American English accents, and the advent of innate classist assumptions people have of others based on the accent they speak with, especially classism tied to level of education and perceived intelligence. Unfortunately, Candace plays perfectly into the Southern accent stereotype. Alas, it's a symptom, not a cause of cultural attitude, so I can't really say anything about how this character is written in that regard. I just found the coincidence to be slightly amusing. Candace's gifts are quite indicative of her intellectual limitations if her baggage wasn't already enough of an indicator. Her unique gifts consist entirely of the kind of toys you give toddlers and preschoolers, and every time she mentions how she used to play with them as a teenager, I can't help but to crack up a little bit. On the other hand, as a humorously extreme juxtaposition, the shoes you gift her are all entirely related to her being an exotic dancer and cam girl. Her childish disposition due to her cognitive limitations are supposed to be her charm point, while also being the key challenge to overcome for her while on dates. And this is a pretty cool way to intertwine her personality with the gameplay mechanics. While I'm not the biggest fan of her character, not necessarily for any of the aforementioned reasons, but mostly because I just don't vibe as well with characters like this in general, she does add a neat twist of her own kind to dates, which would be really cool to see interact with the baggage of someone like Zoe in Endless Mode. I never really knew what to make of Nora when I first encountered her in my first playthrough. After playing through the game this time, I can say that she's definitely an interesting character. She fits a certain archetype of Hispanic American who has a troubled upbringing and is generally disadvantaged in a number of ways, but has a strong belief in family values. It becomes pretty obvious early on, even without her telling you so, that Kiana from the first Huniepop game is her cousin, and she really wants to help her out, even though Nora herself is of limited means. The gifts you give her are centered around offering help to Kiana in this way. While she does steal from time to time, a lot of the time it's for her own survival, and while this does lead to conflict with Lola initially, her backstory that you learn does paint a sympathetic character. There is a little bit of irony with her character though, perhaps a cognitive dissonance on her part, but her preferred affection token is romance, despite the fact that her abandonment and trust issues make her completely avoid strong attachments to people outside of her family. It's not the most ironic possible match, but it is one I can't help but to notice only now. Brooke is a very interesting character. She is Audrey's mother, and through her we can kind of see where Audrey gets her attitude as it pertains to things like shopping using other people's money, for example. Brooke kind of feels like a possible alternate future version of Jessie in that both are afraid about the havoc time might soon be wreaking on them. While Jessie's problems with her daughter and her essentially aging out of her work as a cam girl have consumed her, Brooke's issues lie instead with her husband and what she can do to continue to appear as younger than she really is. She uses her money for everything, including being in a sugar baby relationship and paying for plastic surgery to augment her assets and de-age her overall appearance. Both cases are pretty sad in their own way, or at least they can be seen that way. Jessie clings to memories of what once was. Brooke fights against the progression of time with the resources at her disposal. She takes advantage of the fact that she marries wealthy men and owns the Inadapuna resort and makes a killing from it. It's actually because of this and her resulting materialism that influences one of her more annoying baggage effects. That is, to control which kinds of gifts are allowed to be given, and not only to her but to the other date as well. She won't allow for anything cheap or tacky, or at least anything she perceives as such, anyway. One humorous note about Brooke and Jessie is that, of course, they are one of the pairs you have to date, the so-called double MILF, as Q likes to call them. And I find it funny that neither of them have any knowledge that in the previous game you had hooked up with their daughters, and now you're aiming to do a threesome with them. What a wild world this game is. Ashley is actually the first girl you meet in this game. She is a punk rocker from Australia, and she's just here for a good time, not a long time. She has creative aspirations for the band that she's in, and she's also cutting her teeth in the fashion modeling industry too. What actually brings her to Inadapuna is that she's meeting a famous teleyuber to do a modeling collaboration. Aside from the one time she considered getting married, her personality is centered around non-commitment. Her two types of baggage are defined by this single characteristic. The first one keeps you from matching two of the same tokens consecutively, lest she gets bored and takes an additional move from you. The next one limits the number of moves you are allowed to make on her at one time. More than 4 consecutive moves on her will make her nervous, trigger her commitment issues, and penalize you accordingly. Despite her getting bored easily with people, she still sticks around for you for whatever reason. I don't really know what else to say about her. I do think it's pretty funny that she and Lillian are a pair you have to have a threesome with, despite them being cousins. At least the game makes sure you know that they are cousins-in-law. That was actually kind of funny. One trope the first Huniepop lacked was the character who suffered severe repression of some kind, either by family or religion or some combination of the two. Huniepop 2 makes up for that with Abia. Abia obviously comes from a Muslim background and has run away from her unnamed country to Inadapuna, seemingly for the sake of her own liberation, so to speak. Because she's been forced to repress herself because of her religion so much, now that she has moved away to a secular country, she is free to let herself go in the way she has only ever imagined before. She is very sensitive, and any subject of any kind can set her on a thought spiral to dirty places. She is known to frequent the strip club to watch Candace dance, and has even bought Jessie's videos and has presumably donated to her cam shows. Of all the girls, I felt that Abbia's baggage was the least to worry about. Yes, she can lose sentiment with moves that consist of more than 3 tokens, but I think that compared to the baggage of the other girls, she is the easiest to navigate dates with. It's really whoever she's partnered with that ends up being the greatest trouble. Her lines are funny, and the concept was one I'm surprised wasn't included in the first game. Glad they rectified it here with the sequel. Last but not least is Polly. Polly's initial reveal for Huniepop 2 was met with controversy, apparently. I guess there was some issue with her original design being an Audi only with no option to change it. After some outcry, Huniepot added the option to switch Polly from Audi to Innie depending on your preference. I think the whole controversy might have spoiled the reception of the character for some, and I don't really remember thinking much of the character myself back in the day. But with this playthrough, I ended up liking Polly. She has a New York accent, which I like. It's this classic New York accent that is nostalgic, which is very perfect for her whole persona, since even though she's on the cutting edge of the makeup and fashion business and is highly influential in the teleuber space, she loves throwback stuff like old TV sets, radios, record players, etc. She loves everything retro, like classic rock from the 60s through the 80s, and even some of her fashion sense harkens back to those times as well. Some might say she's retro-maxing. I've been told she's bad, but after this playthrough, at worst, she's a benign beauty content creator who has a penchant for getting into drama with other creators, which, in all fairness, isn't the best look, but I digress. She is another one whose baggage can control what gifts you give both herself and others. You can imagine mixing her together with Brooke can be potentially brutal. But honestly, I really see more about her to like than to not. So she really doesn't live up to the negative hype I was fed about her by others. Huniepop 2 is somehow more character-driven than the first game. While the first Huniepop does a lot to develop the personalities of its characters in various ways, Huniepop 2 goes in deeper, and even the gameplay is more directly influenced by the characters and their various preferences and afflictions than any other game of this style that I can think of. I was surprised with how deeply developed the characters in this game are. It makes complete sense that they would go this route. After all, part of what makes dating simulators is deep enough development of characters to make you care about them in some way to make you want to pursue at least one of them. Since Huniepop 2 is asking you to hook up with all the girls in the game, of course there needs to be some care put into how these characters are crafted. Yes, the game does fall back on some tropes here and there, and when it does fall back on them, it ends up playing into the strength of the game's overall tone. After all, the Honey games are meant to satirize the dating sim genre to a certain degree. At least that's how I've always understood it. And so the mix of really fleshed out character writing and sparing but effective use of certain previously unused tropes ends up giving you an incredibly strong cast of characters overall, and probably the strongest cast of characters in the entire series. The art of the game is a lot more explicit than the art of the previous 2 games. I understand that at least the first Huniepop game can have mods installed to unlock the full lewd images, but even then, not all the images or CGs you unlock are all NSFW. This isn't the case with Huniepop 2. In fact, all of the CGs you unlock are NSFW in a major way. Yes, you can technically censor them, but even with the staging and the scenes and the poses of the characters, there really is no way around it. The art is very high quality, and the number of CGs you unlock here is a lot higher than before. I think it's probably close to 30. The thing I noticed during my playthrough, however, is that it became clear that some of the images seemed to seem like copies of other images. They aren't, but they just seemed like it to me. Some of the poses are so explicit that the fact it's going so hard all the time, you can become desensitized to them pretty quickly. Of course, I can't show them on YouTube, but the CG artwork is, well, I'll put it like this. If you're coming to this for explicit anime-style artwork, then this will be something you will enjoy very much. If you're like me, you can take them or leave them after your 10th one is unlocked. Actually, what's really interesting about Huniepop 2 is that aside from the CG artwork, the in-game artwork actually goes to 2 different styles. The girls in the gameplay section follow a similar style that they do in the first Huniepop. But when you look at the girls' profile pictures, you notice that the art style is actually ripped straight from HunieCam Studio. This is a really cool, subtle way to include HunieCam Studio into the overall universe of Huniepop, though it would be the only way they would. These varied art styles surprisingly don't clash with each other, like one might assume from just hearing it. Honestly, despite having experience with both previous games before my initial playthrough of Huniepop 2, I didn't even notice how HunieCam Studio was introduced in the art direction of Huniepop 2. This kind of seamlessness in the convergence of radically different art styles is pretty impressive, and the more I think about it with respect to HunieCam Studio and its relationship to the series as a whole, the more I can't help but to be impressed and respect its inclusion in the numbered Honey sequel. Now let's talk about the soundtrack. The soundtrack for Huniepop is legendary in the canon of my life, as melodramatic as that sounds. But the soundtrack for Huniepop 2 has to be the perfect amalgamation of everything great about the soundtracks of the first 2 games, and has added to it even more dimension and more depth and fullness than what was present in the previous games. There are a ton of new tracks in this game, but not all of them are. Some tracks do make a return in a revamped way from the previous games, including the scenic overlook and the skating rink from Huniepop, and even the daytime theme from HunieCam Studio enjoys being rearranged to match the greater scope and scale of Huniepop 2. The tone at the beginning with the cinematic score setting the stage for an epic story, and again, the final boss theme at the end being equally cinematic and epic as you date your way through 4 intense non-stop rounds with the Nymphogen, adds to the tension of the scene in a way that only could be done in Huniepop 2. I don't know, it's so difficult to admit that Huniepop 2's soundtrack has so much more impact than the first Huniepop for me. The first Huniepop had such a great soundtrack, and I stand by that. I bought it in digital form. But Huniepop 2 is so next level, I might have to give that one the edge as far as my personal favorites goes. Does this have to be a question I ask myself? Of course not, but that's what it left me thinking. Both the revamped tracks and the new tracks, be it the big cinematic scenes and the others like the private cabana, the hotel room, the dinner table, etc., they all have their own personalities and own vibes and instrumentation. It's really impossible to express with just words just how much wider a scope this soundtrack takes and how much it lends a hand to the overall scale of the game itself. And that's really it, isn't it? Huniepop 2 is more than just Huniepop Plus. It's an entire reinvention of the original game's direction. Not only does it expand the scale and scope of its production, story, and characters, but it takes the addictive gameplay loop of the original and turns it into a multifaceted puzzle akin to something like a Match 3 equivalent to a Sudoku puzzle that really makes you consider your moves in a way that even the original could never do. If we wanted to talk about synergy and strategy in your adult video game, Huniepop 2 probably sits at the pinnacle of them in terms of the sheer depth of its gameplay design and the amount of effort put into making this game. It's hard to believe that there could be anything done to further develop this system. I really don't think there can be a Huniepop 3, which is probably why after all these years we've heard no word from Huniepot about a third game. And you know, that might be for the best. Over the course of 5 years, from the release of Huniepop through to the release of Huniepop 2, the series has been extremely consistent in a number of ways. Yes, the gameplay fundamentally changed between Huniepop and HunieCam Studio, and even with Huniepop 2, it is a completely different game than the original. But that really is part of the beautiful consistency of the Honey series as a whole. Creative people are driven to create what they do because they want to say something, but sometimes the popularity of one of their works can pigeonhole them into reproducing the same work over and over to meet the demands of their audience. Audiences/consumers are kind of well known for being a group who aren't always fully aware of what they really want. See reference to the quote about wanting a faster horse as a prime example when talking about the invention of the automobile. As silly as it might sound, the Honey series of games that we have represent a creator who is always striving to create something different every time, but still enjoyable for those who enjoyed the original. Let's face it, Huniepop is an adult video game, and yet it stands within that genre, which is easily full of some of the most trite slop imaginable. Huniepop not only eclipses that low bar, but in its own complexity and thoughtfulness of design and art surpasses even some of the more mainstream games of a similar genre. HunieCam Studio takes the gameplay and artwork in a radically different direction, but maintains the addictive gameplay loop by keeping the design tight and simple to understand but tricky to master. The element of repeated attempts and high scores still shines through from the spirit of Huniepop into HunieCam Studio, making it just as replayable as its predecessor. Huniepop 2 Double Date then comes along and vastly expands on the dating gameplay, adding new rules and challenges, making the Match 3 gameplay even more of a brain teaser than the original game. The way you interact with the girls is fundamentally different. The attachments you form with the girls are different. Your motivation is different. Heck, your relationship with Q is even deeper this time around than it was in the previous game, even if just a little. The quality of the production is expanded considerably, and it is still so tightly locked down in its own way, an addictive gameplay loop that really begs for repeat playthroughs and continued gameplay even in the post-game, which itself has been expanded on from the original. The consistency lies in the emphasis on replay value. These games all offer so much replay value, not only in its gameplay, its alternative gameplay modes, challenges, or difficulty levels, but also in their worlds, soundtracks, and characters. These are all aspects of Huniepop that even some much larger games with much higher budgets can't pull off easily, let alone a silly anime-style hentai dating sim. If it's anything these games taught me, it's that Huniepop is a series that is better than we all deserve. Maybe that's hyperbole, but I have only grown more fond of these games and its characters, and after these most recent playthroughs, I really think I want to go back and get all the achievements for all 3 of them. Because hey, why not? I want to make Q proud, and maybe in that journey I might learn something new. Until next time, keep retromaxing.